So I'm basically going to start off by having a quick look at some of the main changes in GDPR, and then I'm going to spend a short time looking at research data and shared services and some of the issues around that. Got to do that. Okay, let's start off with a definition. Definitions are great. This is the definition of personal data. I think it's quite important for us to just get our heads around what personal data means. And the definition, it talks about identifiable natural persons, which is an interesting term. In the present data protection, it talks about living people. This is what this means, but it doesn't say it. And what you will see with that definition is that it's got a lot of very similar to current data protection legislation, but there's new things included in there. Things like online identifiers. That's people's IP addresses, for instance. And it talks about genetic, mental, economic changes as well. But that genetic one, much newer, because obviously the present Data Protection Act was in 1998, and times in the digital world have certainly changed since 1998. The next one is what they call special category data. This is what we call sensitive data in the current Data Protection Act. And again, it's got all the same things in, but it has extra things around genetic data, biometric data. But there is some challenging things there on that list, including things like health data. And basically, the key bit of that definition is the first bit, processing of personal data, and the last bit, shall be prohibited unless through consent. There is a few examples where you have got exemptions where you don't need consent, but they are very, very small and very restricted. So let's move on then. 4 key changes that I've identified that I think are the things that you've got to start thinking about. The first one's accountability. I should say accountability and yeah, those sorts of areas. So transparency, I think, is the other one that I was desperately trying to remember off the top of my head. So things like that. So at Jisc, we process personal data belonging to staff and our members, which a lot of you are here. For yourselves in institutions, again staff, but your students. We're actually required to document what personal data we hold, where it came from, and who we share it with. And that should form part of an information audit. It's quite a long and painstaking activity, but well worth doing it. And from there, you can then produce a record of processing, which is part of GDPR that we have to produce. So that actually goes through the information assets that contain personal data, how you're processing it, and questions around that. You also have to document your personal data flows and processing activities as well. So there's quite a lot of work that you need to do, all based around that information audit. An important one around accountability is data processing. Data processors are now accountable for the personal data that it processes. So at the moment, if you could think of a scenario, a cloud provider stores and holds your data. They are a data processor. If they breach in any way, you as a data controller get fined. They don't. Reputational damage, yes, but they don't get fined. I've never thought that's particularly fair. And under new legislation, the data processor, if they do cause a breach of personal data, they also have the potential of being fined. The next area then is something called data protection or privacy by design. And basically, what this is talking about is that data protection and data protection compliance has to be at the beginning of your thoughts when you are going out to design or procure a new system or a new process. And that includes the whole research and development and pilot project phases. So no longer can you just do your stuff. It might include a third party and sharing personal data. If you're doing that in a research and development phase going forward, it's got to be data protection compliant. So you need your data protection people to be involved right from the outset. That also includes with procuring new systems, and that again is really challenging. So for us at Jisc, my big focus has been on our new HR system and our new finance system, which we're procuring at the moment. Both of those products are absolutely full of personal and sensitive personal data. So therefore, we've had to make sure that it's data protection compliant before we procure that those systems. So there's a few examples. There's also something called a data protection impact assessment. I'm going to talk about that briefly in a little bit. The third area is consent. Now the conditions around consent is tightening. You have to have clear and concise terms and conditions. So those days of clicking on to your Apple updates and having screens and screens of text telling you about the terms and conditions, most of which people just click accept straight away. Data protection officers usually get to about page 5 before they give up the will to live, and they click accept. So that, in theory, should be changing, certainly for companies within the EEA. I can't vouch for what American companies will be doing with this, but they are supposed to be complying with the legislation. Most of Jisc's processing is likely to need other justifications. The fair and legal processing, which a lot of people use, is gone, no longer applies. So we are having to look at the different legal bases for processing and making decisions about which ones apply. I'll talk to you a little bit about that again in a moment. Fourth one, this is the one that you will see in the press a lot, and that is around penalties. There is a big culture at the moment, a big fear culture going around about GDPR, and my favourite place to go is LinkedIn. It's hysterical in both the senses of the word. It's full of people basically trying to scare you into buying their consultancy. They are GDPR experts. At the moment, we don't actually know what GDPR in its final form will look like, so it's quite difficult to know how you can be an expert of something which actually hasn't been properly defined yet. There's only 2.5 months to go, no pressure on anybody there then. But there's a lot of that sort of stuff. So to click on data protection and start going through and just look at the scare tactics. I should actually ask at this point, how many, is anybody else in the room a data protection officer or are responsible for data protection in your institutions? Hands up, don't be shy. Wow, there's 2 of us. That's great. So if I slip you a $5, you can basically say what I'm saying is fine, yeah? Brilliant, thank you. Oh, great. Okay then. And the other question I just very quickly wanted to ask is, have I got some archivist records managers? Wow, look at that. I haven't spoken to archivists since, I don't know, 19 whatever it was again. So, yeah, that's good. Okay then. So, penalties then. The thing that you are all no doubt absolutely terrified about are these new €20 million fines, or 4% of your annual global turnover, that you're going to get on the 26th of May if you haven't got one of your privacy notices right. No, it's not going to happen. The ICO have always said, and are still saying, it is going to be proportional. The fines regime in the UK is going to be proportional to whatever the issue breach is. Always been that way, and that will continue. The most that they fined a company is 400k. That was TalkTalk, and I think very recently a marketing company has also been hit for that as well. If you took the TalkTalk example, experts tell us that 4% of their annual global turnover would have turned out to be 59 million. So that is quite a lot of money. But as I say, it's all proportional. They're not going to go to a small institution or a charity and whop them with fines like that. What you've really got to focus on, and certainly we as Jisc are focusing on, is the reputational damage that a breach might cause. So we at Jisc, we process a lot of members' personal data, a lot of student data in a number of systems. So our learning analytics platform is a good example, where we've been working very, very hard, because there is quite a risk to Jisc in that processing of that data. And it's if we breach in something like that, that is where the reputational damage will do us harm more than the ICO coming on later and whopping us with a big fine. So that's the thing to always remember. And if you're pushing to senior managers about the importance of data protection, talk about reputational damage. Breaching a whole load of student data, for instance. So that's that one. Two more I just want to note, make mention of. One is breach notifications. At the moment, if you breach, you don't have to tell the ICO. It's advisable to tell the ICO, but you don't actually legally have to. That's going to change from the 25th of May. And to what level of breach the ICO are expecting you to report? If you have a phishing attack, for instance, do you tell them that there's potential breach there? I think it's going to be a bit of give and take between the ICO and ourselves, but yeah, it has to be mandatory. The other one is it has to be reported within 72 hours of first detection, and data processors will also be required to notify their customers and controllers without due delay. Okay, so 72 hours, Friday afternoon, bank holiday Monday. I used to really look forward on a Friday afternoon with a bank holiday Monday, because I've got a lovely weekend and a Monday to look forward to. Now on a Friday afternoon, I'm going to be looking at my emails going, please, 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 I don't want to be notified of any potential breach, because that's my weekend and bank holiday Monday gone. So 72 hours is quite challenging, I must say. And the last one is around additional rights. You'll see a lot about this as well, around data subjects. We're all data subjects. That we have new access, erasure, portability rights. We are still waiting for the ICO for final guidance on some of those areas. Again, your data protection people will need to just focus in on that once the ICO have actually issued final guidance to see what the implications are. Lots of stories, some of them not true. So, oh, sorry, it's part of the problem. I'll move on. Thank you. If you see that again, just wave your hands, okay? Because I'm just switching this and this. Okay, so at Jisc, what we've done is, well, the first thing that I did was set up a GDPR working group. So basically, I've got other people within Jisc who have got data protection-like responsibilities together, so we could actually work on this. So there's the group includes myself. I've got a records manager now. Our legal team, I work really closely with our legal team. Our chief regulatory advisor, Andrew Cormack, does a lot of work on GDPR externally, supporting the sector. Our head of information security, and then a couple of our external-facing people who have data protection work around membership and sales and digital resources. So we meet monthly. We have a big action plan, and basically our remit is to make sure that Jisc is compliant, but also to give support and guidance to the FE and HE and skills sector. An example this today is me being allowed out. I usually am I'm internally facing, supporting Jisc, and they don't usually let me out of the building, but I'm here, so this is lovely. And basically what we've done is followed the 12 steps of GDPR, just a mere 12 steps to GDPR. Sounds really, really easy. These 12 steps, we've actually removed 2 of them. We don't have anything to do with children. Children defined under the bill going through Parliament at the moment as 13, and the other one is international. We're not a global company yet, and so therefore we don't have to worry about that one. But universities who have got institutions outside of the EEA, that they may well need to look at that as well. But the first thing we did was remove those and reorganize the whole of the staircase, because basically number 11 is get a data protection officer, and as I always say, if you get to number 11, if you get to number, oh, it's that one. I can't see where I am now. There we go. If you get to number 11, then it's probably too late, and you're going to have to do steps 1 to 10 all over again. So I'm going to get myself into sync. Here are the steps. I'm not going to go in very much detail with these. There's only one data protection officer here after all. But what I would advise you to do is when you get these slides, share them with your data protection people. what we have got is a lot of links in there to a load of blogs and articles that we've done. They're on our website, and so they just help you focus in. But the key things are around awareness, so doing a lot of awareness training with your staff, focusing in on the teams who are doing a lot of processing of personal data. Do your information audit, step number 2. Step number 3 is the privacy information. That's the big challenge. That's looking at your privacy notices. We have 135 services that we're operating at the moment, and a lot of research stage. We have to rewrite our privacy notices for all of those services to get them compliant. So a lot of work there. Individual rights, again, I've put some links to 1 or 2 articles which are out there at the moment. And also subject access requests have changed. The big change on subject access requests are moving it from 40 days that you've got to do a subject access or return it down to a month now. So that they're the main that's the main one on that one. Step 6 and 7 I put together, and now this is the legal basis for processing personal data. Okay, and this is quite important for some of the work that you may be thinking about around research. Okay, so if you are processing personal data, you have to do it with one of these 6. I'm not going to go again into much detail on them, but there are things around through the contract, through legal obligations, through vital interest, through public task, legitimate interest. And only until we get to number 6, consent, do we find consent. And that's there for a reason. The recommendation, and I strongly recommend, is that if you can avoid consent, go for one of those 5. If you go for consent, you've got to remember that it's got to be fair and appropriate consent, it's got to be opt-in, and it's got to be as easy to opt in as it is to opt out. And the opt-out can be a real challenge. So that's what we are always striving to do, is to get to consent as the last resort. But you've got to do one of those 6. The first document, what's your justification, actually is a blog that Andrew did, which goes through each of those 6, asking a set of questions. So you can go through your process, your legal process, your personal processing, have a little look and ask those questions and work your way down. If number 1 fits, then you're fine. Just keep working your way down until you get to number 6. Next one, I've already mentioned about data protection breaches. I've also covered the data protection by design, which is step 10. The data protection impact assessment, basically if you are processing a lot of personal data in a system or a service, and there is a risk involved in it, then you have to do what's called a data protection impact assessment. So that is a piece of work that the data protection officer will do with the service owner, looking at data and risk. So at the moment we've identified 2 services, our learning analytics and our security service, that we are doing DPIAs on, and 2 systems that we've identified, our HR and our finance system. So that's data protection by design and impact assessments. Number 11, get a data protection officer. There's a really good guidance on the ICO about what that entails, so there's a link there. Okay, part 2. Time check. Okay. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about research and GDPR. Research occupies a really privileged position with GDPR because it's got a lot of stuff focused in on it. So an organization that processes personal data for research purposes may, and I stress the word may, avoid restrictions on secondary processing and processing sensitive categories of data. There's a typo there. And there I put the Article 6 in brackets for recital 50. Okay, so remember that one. As long as they implement appropriate safeguards, they may also override data subject rights to object to processing and seek the erasure of personal data. So what you need to do is, when you're looking at research, you need to focus in on that article, and my recommendation would be is to Google research There's a lot of advice beginning to come out there to try and help you with that. GDPR may, and I stress the word may, permit organisations to process personal data for research purposes without the data subject's consent. Okay, and there's the article there. Article 6 in brackets 1, in brackets F, recitals 47 and 157. Okay, I'm going to be testing you all on these at the end of the talk, if that's okay. I feel I'm out of sync again. That's that one. Yes. Okay, the number 2. Does that say number 2 up there? No, it doesn't, does it? Oh. That's interesting. There we are. Ah, okay, right. Let's go. I'm there now. Sorry. Research as a basis for processing. So what I've actually done there, there is a slide there which talks about research and consent as a legal basis, and it tells you some of the pitfalls and some of the things you need to focus on. I'm not going to go and read that slide. I'm going to let you go away, and when this is circulated you can have a look at it. And the other slide that I put up is around legitimate interest as a basis for processing. So those 2 slides will give your data protection people something to start thinking about when looking at research going on in the institution. The important one is anonymized data. So if you anonymize your data, so you can't reconstruct and work out who that data is about, that's not personal data. So data protection doesn't apply. So perhaps the answer is always think about anonymizing your personal data first of all, because if not, you've got to go through quite a lot of stuff. But say there's plenty of guidance there. The last slide I wanted to just talk about is around shared services. So there's a number of issues that you need to think about with shared services, and I've just listed them here. So the first one is around, are you dealing with personal or anonymized data? That's the first question I would ask when looking at using a shared service. What are you wanting to put in there? So if it's personal data, then obviously there's a lot of work that you need to do. The second question that you must ask is, where is that data being stored? Is it within the EEA, the European Economic Area, or is it outside of it? Brexit has slightly confused things. I suspect that at some point we will be leaving the EEA, but because the ICO have been instrumental in writing the GDPR legislation with the Article 29 working group in Europe, the chances are that we will hit the various thresholds and we will be allowed to transfer data with the EEA members, as a number of other countries can already. If the provider is outside of the EEA, then you've got some serious questions to ask. For instance, if it's in the US, we have at the moment something called Privacy Shield. There's a link to it if you want to read it. Good luck on that one. And all I would say on Privacy Shield is at the moment there are 2 legal challenges to it. If some of you might remember Safe Harbor, which was the prior one to this, that went. There are 2 challenges at the moment, so will Privacy Shield last? I don't know. What ourselves at Jisc and what a lot of people are trying to do is to get these big companies to accept the EU model clauses. And for those who do, then that's absolutely fine. So an example would be Microsoft have signed up to EU model clauses. Google have, though you have to tick various boxes in your system for that, I understand. So where's that data being stored? Third area, you need to have a clear digital strategy, particularly around technical and legal complexities if you're going to adopt cloud services. We have on our website, our GDPR site, we have a link to an article that we've just produced on cloud services, so it might be worthwhile going and having a look at that. Paul has already talked about the rather arduous nature of data management. That's my life, Paul. My life is arduous, yes. Okay, so look at things like data sharing agreements, You've got to make sure that the new transparency requirements are there. You've got to do your work around legal basis for sharing personal data. You've got to carry out appropriate due diligence on service providers. And you've got to check your GDPR clauses in any contract and agreement. It's a lot of stuff that you have to do. And the final area is long-term preservation and digital continuity is a challenge. It was really nice this morning to hear about, I spotted Dorset Archive Service. I actually, when I was an information manager, helped the county archivist and supported the county archivist in getting digital continuity up and running. And then we got a really good archivist in, who then basically took it around, and I took a big step back. So it was really nice to see that they're still going, and we procured Preservica at the time. So yeah, digital continuity is a real challenge. And the challenge that I always had was around things like adoption records. So as an information manager, trying to encourage the move from paper to electronic as a way forward. Okay then, so what do you do with retention schedules of 100 years if it's in a digital format? A real challenge, and that's where things like digital preservation surely has to be the answer. Obviously, Paul has mentioned about the RDSS platform, and it's designed to try and take some of that pain away from you. And I think there's going to be more on that in a moment. This is my last page for you, just to some links to the ICO, the ICO site. Yep. There you go. I was going to really hide it from you. So for the ICO, I thought you were saying time's up, and then I realised I got away with that. Okay. So that's good. The Article 29 working group, there's the link to their side. There's a lot of free legal advice out there on sites. So I've just put a link to one, Bird and Bird, and what that site does is look at the current legislation, looks at the new legislation, and then tells you what's going on there in a very legalistic way. Jisc provides a lot of sector guidance and advice, of which you've had some links through this talk. So if you go to our .act.uk/GDPR homepage, we've got a lot of stuff on there. I've just set up a new HEFE GDPR working group with some leading people within the field, within the institutions, also other organisations as well. We've got a senior member of the ICO sits on that group as well. And what we're doing is producing a number of articles and guidance over the next few months and beyond, of which we'll peer review. So the ICO will peer review what's being put on. We've got a team who are going to be looking at research in particular. So it's definitely a watch this space. And finally, there is a link to the Jisc Research Data Shared Service. I thought I'd put that on as well, since it'd be nice to come along by them. So that's it from me.